This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Hone, and it is Wednesday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This series normally ranks cards based on how successful they've been at Magic's highest level, but from time to time I like to do more opinion-based videos. Last week I gave my picks for the 10 lamest Mythic rares. This was a video about cards that don't live up to the billing of a Mythic rare, which are supposed to be cool, unique cards that, in ideal scenarios, can really warp the game around them. This time, I'm looking at the mirror image of that. Cards that are Mythic rares who live up to the billing in terms of feeling like a Mythic rare, but cards that have largely been duds in terms of playability. Some of the cards on this list have found some spotty success at Magic's highest level, but most of them have never found any success in competitive Magic, and even not a whole lot in EDH. Basically, these are Mythic rares that are janky, a term which, for me at least, implies that a card does something really cool or interesting, something that tempts you to play it in your deck, but the card is difficult to actually succeed with. Just like on the lame Mythic Rare list, only cards that were initially printed at Mythic Rare are eligible for this list. Cards that have been reprinted at that rarity were not considered. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10 I have Ojutai Exemplars, which has a really cool modal trigger. On theme with the Jeskai, Ojutai theme, and Tarkir block, it is something that triggers with non-creature spells. The exemplars come with a variety of options, and most of the time at least one of them is worth doing. Tapping creatures, blinking the exemplars, or giving it first strike and lifelink is pretty nice. Blinking it out in response to removal, or giving it the keyword abilities at instant speed is a lot of fun, and sometimes tapping down a creature is enough for you to go crazy with your attacks. The exemplars do have a single Grand Prix top 8 from Standard, but it had a hard time finding any consistent success, largely because it was vulnerable and didn't make a lasting impact on the board if it got killed right away. It also suffered from being a 4-drop in the same standard as Siege Rhino, a card that is really good because it is all the things that the exemplars aren't. It impacts the board right away, and it's bigger. Still, Exemplars is a really cool card and certainly a Mythic rare. The prowess-like trigger and the Swiss Army knife of options are really cool. At number 9 I have Sire of Stagnation. Like the Exemplars, this was a card that was sweet and limited, but definitely turned out to be pretty janky elsewhere. Most Eldrazi are a lot bigger than this guy, but the Sire has a really cool reverse landfall ability. Every land your opponent plays means you get to draw 2 cards and exile a couple cards from the top of their library. The latter part isn't that great most of the time, but it was on theme with Eldrazi in Battle for Zendikar block, as many of them could exile cards and interact with cards in exile. The Sire is the kind of Mythic rare you look at and you just imagine it taking over the game, but that ideal scenario didn't materialize much. Once you're paying 6 mana for this, your opponent probably doesn't desperately need to play any more lands, so you won't normally be affecting their game plan a whole lot. They can probably cast most of the cards in their deck, and they just won't even trigger this ability because they won't need to play lands. I thought this guy was so cool that I desperately tried to make him work in a casual modern blue-black land destruction deck. I thought, hey, my opponent will have to play more lands if I blow them up, and this was sort of true, but even in a deck against casual competition, it didn't really work out the way I dreamed. Still, definitely a Mythic rare with a cool design. At number 8, it's Mist Hollow Griffin. A 4-mana 3/3 flyer is far from exciting, but Mist Hollow Griffin was the first card to be straight up castable from exile. Before this, cards that ended up in exile didn't really have a way out. The exception to this was, of course, cards that briefly exile things before letting you move them out of exile, but those types of effects are usually short-lived. The Griffin can stay in exile forever and just be cast whenever you want to. That's a pretty sweet effect because provided you exile the Griffin one way or another, it is effectively an extra card in your hand, and you're not really giving up the value when you have to exile it for some other effect. You basically just get it back. And sure, the body itself isn't super impactful, but I like that type of value, and I like the idea of something castable from exile. These days, other cards have been printed at rare that can be cast from exile, like Eternal Scourge and the new Squee, but the first card with that effect definitely deserved to be Mythic rare because it was so unique. At number 7, it's Worldfire. This Mythic rare certainly has a game-warping ability. There aren't many other cards out there that are more impactful, completely resetting the board and putting both players into top deck mode while also putting everyone's life at 1 is pretty insane. That big of an effect does need to cost 9 mana, but yeah, Worldfire basically puts you at the mercy of the top deck, and whoever can get anything going first, anything at all, is going to win the game, and that won't always be you. You normally want to win if you're paying 9 mana, and this doesn't do that, but a spell that pretty much resets the game with both players at 1 life is definitely a mythic rare. At number 6, it's Polyraptor, which has a really sweet enrage trigger. Creating a copy of it every time it is damaged means that you can really snowball things with them. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, and so on. This was even a combo that was doable in Standard because of Forerunner of the Empire, which is also something I saw people pull off once or twice in Limited, and seeing that combo go off is one of the sweetest, jankiest things in all of Magic. The Raptor costs too much mana though for it to be entirely viable, and it is actually quite vulnerable until you find a way to pull off the combo. For that reason it has never made the big time, but that doesn't make it feel any less mythic. A creature making exponential copies of itself would honestly be kind of weird at any other rarity. At number 5, I have Crested Sunmare. First off, the Mare is a lord for a very specific creature type that isn't all that common: horses. Giving all horses indestructible is already a pretty unique line of text, but the fact that the Sunmare can churn out horse tokens if you're gaining life means that the Sunmare can support itself and put its indestructible ability to use even in a deck without any other horses. Churning out indestructible horse tokens when you gain life seems pretty mythic to me. At number 4, I have Disciple of the Ring. Earlier in the list, we had Ojutai Exemplars, a creature with a modal ability, and now we have the Disciple here, who also has a modal ability. I'm a pretty big fan of those types of effects because I really like flexibility, and the Disciple here offers you some interesting options, provided you're willing to spend mana and exile instant or sorcery cards from your graveyard. Countering spells, pumping the Disciple, tapping and untapping things, the Disciple can really wreak havoc on a board it is left alone on, and the graveyard is well stocked for it. The Disciple is held back though because you can't always guarantee either of those things are going to happen. And that's why it's never been anything other than janky. But I think that's fine, it's a super fun card with a really unique design. At number 3, I have Ghastly Conscription. At the beginning of last week's video on the lamest mythic rares, I gave a few specific examples of mythic rares that aren't considered very good, but certainly feel mythic, and Ghastly Conscription was one of them. Manifest is a mechanic we haven't seen a ton of, so in some ways it already seems pretty unique, but the whole idea of turning an entire graveyard of creatures into manifest creatures is pretty awesome. It will not only populate your board with a bunch of 2/2s, in an ideal situation anyway, it also creates a fair bit of chaos. That's because your opponent has no idea which manifest is which creature, making combat a pretty big headache for them. That is definitely a mythic rare effect. At number 2, I have Sphinx Ambassador. Sphinxes already get a little bit of a leg up into mythic rare territory by virtue of being Blue's iconic creature type, but, as I noted in my video on the lamest mythic rares, being an iconic creature type itself is not enough for a card to be elevated to mythic rare. It has to do something more interesting than just being a large, cool creature, and the Ambassador here definitely does that. Playing into the flavor of Sphinxes as challenging people to mind games and riddles, the Ambassador lets you snag a creature card from your opponent's library every time you do combat damage, at which point your opponent will have to guess what the card is. If they get it right, you don't get to do anything with the card, but if they get it wrong, you get to put the creature onto the battlefield for free. The mind games this can create are pretty fun, kind of like the Battle of Wits scene in The Princess Bride. If you have the Sphinx cast against you, you have to try to figure out whether your opponent would have grabbed the best creature in your deck, but then you have to consider whether your opponent got a different creature because it was less likely that you would have named that card, and so on. The Sphinx has a very unique and silly effect, and it definitely deserves its mythic rarity. And at number 1, I have 2 cards, Demonic Pact and Captive Audience. They bear some striking similarities to one another, and I like them both a ton, so putting them together at number 1 made sense to me. Both are enchantments that sit on the battlefield like ticking time bombs. Demonic Pact gives you 3 powerful triggers, doing 4 damage to anything while gaining 4, making your opponent discard cards and drawing you cards. But after you've done each of those things, the Pact will make you lose the game on your next upkeep. Demonic Pact actually found some modest success at Magic's highest level in a janky standard deck that utilized Harmless Offering to give away the Pact and make your opponent lose. Captive Audience, meanwhile, gets stuck on your opponent, and while it doesn't make them automatically lose the game in the same way the Pact can, giving your opponent all 3 of those effects is no joke, and if all 3 happen, you will usually be in a pretty bad place. That said, it does cost 7 mana, and since your opponent makes the decisions, they will always be choosing what is least bad for them. And those things have kept Captive Audience away from Pro Tour and Grand Prix top 8s, but it is a ton of fun and definitely a mythic rare. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. What's your favorite Janky Mythic rare? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future episodes of this series, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on the over 250 other episodes, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.